Welcome back. All right, now that the Super Bowl's done, and I did watch most of the fourth quarter, um, it is what it is. And at any rate, it's done. So I figured I want to do a 32 team video. Now, I had this idea on Friday. I had no time on Saturday in which to put this video together. And then a lot of the players on this list had pretty good weekends. So I really wish I had been able to find the time on Friday to put this video together, post it to the channel. And people could have said, hey, these guys had good weekends. But that being said, these are players that I feel like are playing well right now and I want to talk about. So this is just one of those, one player from each team I want to talk about. One of the reasons I love watching as much hockey as I do is because then it does give me the ability to talk in these videos about players that have impressed me and in a lot of cases may not be getting as much attention as others on the team. You'll see that this is in a randomized order, completely randomized, all 32 teams on the board, and go. We're starting with the Calgary Flames, and I want to talk a little bit about Michael Backlund. Michael Backlund so far, and the stats I had to update too, because I thought I want to have the stats on the board. 53 games, 10 goals, 23 assists, 33 points. As up and down as the season's been for Calgary, and that dates back to the very beginning of it, right up until now, I think Backlund's been remarkably consistent. I'm very impressed with Backlund's penalty killing. I'm impressed with his 5-on-5 play as well. And I think the guy's an absolute gem. So that was part of what started me putting this list together, is just certain players where I was looking at and saying, pretty good. Now, this one, I know has been talked about with Detroit fans and believe is currently injured. That being said, Jake Walman, 34 games, 5 goals, 4 assists, 9 points. So Moritz Seider was off to a rough start to the season with Ben Sherratt, and then they put him with Walman, and all of a sudden Seider's numbers turn around. Now, you may look at that and say, well, that's the anchor for Sherratt. I actually prefer to look at it too and say, you know what? This kind of shows that Walman's a pretty good defender. Walman's a pretty good player. I've liked Walman since he was with the Blues, and I still do. And I think that while the numbers aren't like jaw-dropping, they don't have to be. He doesn't have to produce in order for his numbers to be good. And yet, 5 goals in 34 games for a defenseman, that's scoring at a pretty good rate. So I thought I wanted to have Walman up there, and there he is. For Edmonton, and this is a player I've talked about with Edmonton before. This guy actually did have a goal on the weekend anyways. Did not have a goal today. Now sits in 41 games with 10 goals, 7 assists, 17 points. I like McLeod. And if you look at that, that means that in half a season's worth of hockey he has 10 goals. So that prorates out to 20 goals over an 82-game schedule. And I think for a team that, needs that depth scoring, I think they're getting it from McLeod. I don't think there's any reason to complain about McLeod. We're talking about Puljujarvi and him potentially being waived. And I think the development of McLeod is part of it, where he has made himself more important. Now, there's the cap hit, too, that definitely hurts Puljujarvi there, too, because you need to make that extra space for Yamamoto. But I want to give McLeod some credit. So 10 goals, 7 assists. He had a goal yesterday. Don't believe he had any points today. For Nashville, Cody Glass. His career was done, remember? Cody Glass, due to all the injuries and everything else, his career was basically done. He has found himself a pretty sweet spot in that Nashville lineup. In 40 games, 7 goals, 12 assists, 19 points. He's never going to set the world on fire when it comes to the scoring side of things, but Glass is working hard. He's fit in very well with Nashville this year, and I've been impressed with his totals. I've been impressed with the work ethic. Again, a player who was kind of written off as the guy's a bust. He's never going to make it at the NHL level. It's nice to see him with half a season's worth of games played thus far, and I look forward to seeing what he does the rest of the way. For Colorado, I went with, because we always talk about Makar, I want to talk about Taves. So Taves, 49 games, 4 goals, I believe it's 24 assists, 28 points. Let me turn around and look. Yes, got it. Devon Taves, underrated defenseman. Yes, still considered one of the greatest steals in hockey history that they got him from the Islanders. I would say yes to that as well. And I like his play. So while I love Makar, I love Bowen Byram as well. And in general, I think the defense in Colorado doesn't get as much credit for that Stanley Cup as I think they should. And I know Makar gets a lot of it, but I mean that whole defense was very solid. And Taves a big part of that. So as he gains more and more experience, I really think that Taves will also garner more respect, more attention around the league. I wanted to throw him onto the board for this video. For LA, this isn't going to surprise anybody. Mikey Anderson. So Mikey Anderson having another remarkable season. The good news, too, is in 54 games, 2 goals, 11 assists, 13 points. The points totals aren't fantastic, but with Mikey Anderson, you don't expect that with this game anyways. It feels like that's higher than last year, though, for points per game. And so that's good news. And really, Mikey Anderson, I've been very impressed with him for years now. It really shouldn't surprise anybody. He's the one on the board for the Kings. There are a lot of young players I like for the Kings, including Byfield. Byfield's games picked up since he came up from the AHL. Sleep on him at your peril. And I will also say Turcotte, who may never live up to the hype when he was drafted, has looked better as well. He's had a lot of injury problems. It's nice to see him playing better. For Dallas, I went with a guy who's still overpaid. I'm not going to say that Sagan's contract is great. And for salary, he's the highest paid player in the NHL this year. But in 54 games, 14 goals, 21 assists, 35 points. Again, not that he's living up to the contract in its totality, but when Rope Hintz went down with injuries, Sagan jumped in and played very well. And I think Sagan's had a good year. So while Jamie Benz had this huge bounce back, Sagan has as well. This is why they brought in Pete DeBoer. They wanted more goals. It seems to be working with Dallas, and now it's just a matter of consistency in their game. But Sagan's been leading by example. The effort's absolutely been there. And I think the frustration I've had with Sagan and Ben, especially over the last couple of years, it's kind of dissipated right now. I don't have any issues with either player and their effort. Their contracts aren't fantastic for the production, but there's only so much you can do. Once it's signed, it's signed. For Ottawa, a player who may move at the deadline. And honestly, I hate to say this because I know he likely doesn't want to move at the deadline, but I kind of hope he does. So Derek Brassard has been thrust into a position where he's had to play a more prominent role than expected. And I think he's done well considering the fact that he is, at this stage in his career, basically best suited to being bottom six. But he's shown that he can produce. 8 goals, 5 assists in 41 games isn't bad. Again, for what was expected of Brassard. But if he gets traded, if he goes to a couple more teams, he could break the Mike Sellinger record for the most teams played for. So that is, on a selfish level, I'm kind of hoping and rooting for him to break the record of most teams played for. I don't think he wants that, and it's just one of those things. It's a record I look at that's Mike Sellinger's alone. He might be the only player who could threaten it. Max Domi's getting close. If Chicago deals Domi at the deadline, we can start talking about how many teams Domi's been through. But Brassard is really, really close to getting to and maybe breaking that record. Then you get into Philadelphia. And the interesting thing is, I wanted to talk about Cam York, and then Cam York on the weekend had himself quite the couple of games, although he didn't get a point. A goal and 10 assists in 28 games for Cam York, but I think he's played really well for Philadelphia. Might be their best defenseman right now, and I mean at both ends of the ice. D'Angelo's their best offensive defenseman. You can make the argument Provorov is up there with their all-time best defenseman too, but I would say York's the one that's impressed me the most. Cam York has been absolutely sensational. Then we get to St. Louis and to a player who didn't play this weekend, but I'm going to put him on the board anyways because I want to talk about Jake Neighbors. Jake Neighbors, 27 games played this year, 4 goals, 4 assists, 8 points. And the point total, 8 points in 24 games, doesn't jump out at you. But the work ethic from Neighbors has been really strong. And this is what I was talking about. This is something I noticed with guys who are putting in the work every single shift. That every time they're on the ice, you notice them. And you notice them in a positive way. These are guys who very often, later on in their career, as they get into their mid-20s, maybe even late 20s, the production starts to go up. Eventually, and I'm thinking of Mangiapane, I'm thinking about Arvidsson in LA, they start off, the work is there, the numbers just aren't. Eventually those numbers catch up with the work. So I think Neighbors is going to do that too. I don't know what the ceiling is with Neighbors, but I like his play with St. Louis. For Carolina, you kind of have to go with the defenseman, don't you? But I didn't want to go with one of the sexy picks that I normally do. So I'm going to go with Brady Shea. Brady Shea in 51 games, 10 goals, 13 assists, 23 points. Shea has been remarkable this year for a Carolina team that has a very solid defense. It was remarkable watching Carolina and the Rangers yesterday and realizing every year we get more and more players that have played for both teams. And you get games between the Rangers and Carolina where it's basically Carolina alumni versus Rangers alumni, and it gets kind of weird. And Shea's another example of that. But I think he's been quite good. I think he's fit in with Carolina quite well. And as we saw last year with Tony DeAngelo, You get a defenseman there that maybe the defense isn't fantastic. There are guys who can cover for that. So maybe with Shea, maybe there's guys who are covering for him in Carolina. If there is, you really wouldn't know. For Boston, I went with, and this is somebody I was actually arguing about on the internet today. I will defend Trent Frederick. Now, I'm going to say this. So 49 games, 10 goals, 9 assists, 19 points. Bruins fans need to get over the fact he was a first-round draft pick. Trent Frederick is, but the other thing, too, is he was a number 29 pick. I think we lose sight of that sometimes. Number 29 picks are not necessarily superstars. And yes, there's guys in the second round who end up being star players, but everybody passed on them. That's how they end up in the second round. So for Frederick, with the 10 goals this season, he's already, getting to career highs. And I could see him ending up with 15, 16 goals on top of the tough game that he plays, in that he has to be physical, he has to be willing to drop the gloves, and he puts the points on the board. I've been very impressed with his turnaround this year. And there have been times where Frederick was the one Bruin that I was like, if they moved on from him, I'd be perfectly okay with it. Pittsburgh, I'm going with Pierre Olivier Joseph. And yes, he's had a very good weekend. It might feel like I'm jumping on a bandwagon here, but the reality is I love Joseph's game. I think of the defenseman in Pittsburgh, he might now be my favorite. He's just playing so well. And I say that even though Letang is coming off of a great season. Obviously, this year he's had health issues and injury problems. But I just think Joseph's been fantastic for them. And then, as I said, I put this list together, and then I saw Joseph, have a great night the other night. And I was like, oh, cool. Now I'm going to have him on the board, and people are going to be like, well, of course you're going to pick Joseph, because look what he did against Anaheim. But yeah, I'm going to go with that. New Jersey, this is another one who had a good weekend, but I'm still putting him on the board anyways, is Thomas Tatar. One thing with Tatar, so he's played 52 games. He's now up to 12 goals, 18 assists, 30 points. The point totals, the goal totals are getting there. But with Tatar, early on in the season, the goals were not going in the net. He had no luck around the net. It never changed his game. I never saw him get frustrated. I never saw him ending up dropping down in the lineup. And that's something that you'll see. You'll see players, getting frustrated the puck's not going in the net. And we as fans can watch that and say, well, that's understandable. He, usually by this point in the season, he's got 20 goals. Instead, he's got 5. And we understand the frustration. But when a guy doesn't show that frustration as much and just keeps playing his game, I think that's great. And I think it sends the right message to the younger players, too. So I think Tatar has been very good at leading by example. And now with Jack Hughes out of the lineup for a couple weeks for them, Tatar may very well see his points and goal totals go up quite a bit. Chicago. So I've talked about this recently, that I sometimes watch when a player switches teams and whether or not their totals get better. In the case of Jason Dickinson, absolutely. 47 games, 8 goals, 11 assists, 19 points. He's been much better in Chicago than he was in Vancouver. I'll even go as far as to say I think he's improved his stock value, and if Chicago decided to trade him at the deadline, they would probably do okay. I think Dickinson's been a win for them. I think that he had to get out of Vancouver, and his play in Chicago has been good. Him and Lafferty together, I don't know what it is, but at any rate, it's worked. For Buffalo, you wouldn't think that Olofsson would be the guy I'd put on the board. You would think everybody be talking about Olofsson, but they're really not. 51 games, 23 goals, 7 assists for 30 points. He's in the running for the Cy Young, of course. Cy Young is, the goals being the wins, the assists being the losses. Looks like a Cy Young. Anyways, yeah, it's a baseball reference. People get it, nod and go, yep. People who don't, it's fine. But at any rate, he's getting a lot of goals. Olofsson on pace for over 30 goals this year. That's remarkable. But because Buffalo scores so often, feels like he's overlooked. I mean, people talk about Thompson, they talk about Skinner, they talk about Tuck, Cousins as well. And so Olofsson's kind of the forgotten, again, potentially 30-plus goal scorer. I cannot remember a time that's happened with Buffalo where they've had multiple guys who are really good goal scorers. Said it again, I'll say it here. This Buffalo team is different than the one they've had for the last 10 years. Minnesota. And the funny thing is, I got asked about this player during the live stream today. And so he's on the list, and that's Jared Spurgeon. 52 games, 9 goals, 15 assists, 24 points. I think he's been their best defenseman. I think that he's been able to lead at both ends of the ice. And I like what Spurgeon brings. I really like his game with Minnesota. So while there are problems with Minnesota and They've been cold lately. They did win last night. We'll see if that carries over into other games. I do like what Spurgeon brings for them. For San Jose, I was really surprised Sturm didn't score today. I thought I'd have to change the numbers for him, but he's still in 46 games, 11 goals, 6 assists, 17 points. The thing that stands out to me with Nico Sturm is early in the season, didn't he miss an empty net? And he was missing really easy opportunities. And I was like, well, Sturm doesn't have it. And now he's 11 goals in 46 games. That's not bad. And we'll see if that improves stock value, if they decide to move him, or if he sticks around and stays in San Jose. It seems to agree with him playing for the San Jose Sharks. So for a team in San Jose that's had their issues this year, absolutely. I think Sturm's been a positive. I think he's been pretty good and a pretty solid addition. So I wouldn't blame him for saying, I'd like to stay in San Jose. So for Toronto, it has to be a defenseman because the defense in Toronto gets a lot of criticism. And I get it because, again, it's that microscope you're under. But Mark Giordano, for the contract he's given them, 54 games, 3 goals, 16 assists, 19 points. When guys went down and they were short on the blue line, Giordano stepped forward, showed his leadership, and showed he could still be a valuable defenseman to a contending team. So I've been very impressed with Giordano, and I think he's had a really solid season. I honestly think, any discussion of whether or not he might retire this season, nope. I think he sticks around. I don't see any reason to think he won't. He's no longer at the Vezina level, sure, but he's still playing quite well. All right, Winnipeg. I have to go with an old favorite for Winnipeg because this is a team that's scoring a lot as well. And it's easy to overlook Nick Ehlers, and I'll say why. Because in 17 games, he only has 4 goals. So with the 4 goals in 17 games, it looks like he's having a down year. But I will say this for Nick Ehlers. He is driving play. He's driving the play, and he's doing quite well. The 15 assists, the 19 points overall shows you he is doing quite well. And the goals are going to come. Sooner or later, the goals are going to come. And for Winnipeg, if they end up being dangerous and they end up being a team that's really hard to beat in the playoffs, guys like Ehlers are going to make the difference. I've loved his work ethic for years, and so he's on the board for today. For the New York Islanders, no, it's not Horvat. For the New York Islanders, I'm going with Sebastian Aho, the other Sebastian Aho, of course. In 51 games, 4 goals, 10 assists, 14 points. Aho has been solid for an Islanders team that I've talked a lot about their goaltending coaching and how good it is. And now no matter who the goaltender is with the Islanders, you're going to get quality goaltending. Let's go ahead and give props to their defensive setup and the fact that defensemen develop pretty well. Noah Dobson has had, very strong development. They developed Pelech and Pulock themselves as well. And now here's Sebastian Aho. This is a team that knows how to do homegrown defensemen. And Aho's another success story. So he's gone from being just the other Sebastian Aho to the one in Carolina to being a pretty legit top 6/top 4 defenseman in his own right with the New York Islanders. And I think his development may be part of the reason why at the end of the year, Mayfield's a free agent. You can probably let him go. For the Anaheim Ducks, and this guy had a pretty good weekend. Not that he necessarily enjoyed that game in Vegas today, but Adam Henrique. So one list I wanted to do was players that are kind of reviving their careers or getting back to where they were. And that was a list I've tried a couple times this year to come up with because I wanted to do like a top 10, but I wasn't able to come up with a full 10 that I was happy with, where I didn't feel like I was necessarily just bringing up guys who are just having a good year, not necessarily a huge bounce back. But Adam Henrique in 53 games, 19 goals, 14 assists, 33 points. He's been kind of fantastic. So I will say, and I said this when I was in Anaheim last week, I think Troy Terry's their best player. I think he's their best player overall. I think Zegras is their most exciting player and will be their best overall player. I'm more trusting of Terry in more parts of the game than Zegras. But Adam Henrique needs a lot of consideration too if you're talking about an MVP for the Ducks this year. I'm not saying he'd win it. The win, obviously, if it's a popular vote, I think it would go to Zegras. I think Terry would get a lot of consideration. And some would understand that Gibson, it's not his fault that defense sucks. But Adam Henrique has been right there. He's been great. And so if they decide to move Henrique, I think there'd be a lot of interest. I think that, and not only that, but I don't think Henrique is just having a hot year. I think he's just playing really well. And I don't get the feeling it's just a hot streak. For Washington, Gustavsson. Now, Gustavsson's cooled off a bit, right? He had that ridiculous hot streak going. He wasn't going to keep that up. But that being said, I thought he deserved some recognition in this for the fact he's had 7 goals, 23 assists, 30 points in 54 games. He just produces. It's what he does. It's who Gustavsson is. And so I wanted that to be on the board as well. So basically, it's just the way this works. I'm going through one player from each team. And Gustavsson, I think, has been really, really good. All right, for Arizona. So now that the Arizona Coyotes are moving on from Chychrun, and I had the question of, okay, so with Chychrun out of the lineup, who's going to be getting a more prominent spot? I think we found out on the weekend. I think it's going to be Juuso Valamaki. And in 49 games, he has 2 goals, 16 assists, 18 points. It didn't work out in Calgary. Calgary waives him. Arizona takes him. Arizona's turned Valamaki into a pretty good defenseman. And he's on a very good contract with Arizona going forward. I like what Arizona does. Arizona gets these projects, right? Players that are either through waivers or guys don't want this contract anymore. That's how they get Gostisbehere. And they make them better. And they make them marketable pieces that they could move on from at a later date. And I think Valamaki's one of those players. They can hold Valamaki, they can keep him, but if they decided to move him, they would absolutely get something back. Whereas Calgary ended up just having to waive him. And I mean, we can come back to this at a later date too. Another video I've been wanting to do is waiver wire pickups and the waiver wire, the teams that do really well with waiver wire pickups and the teams that don't. And so I need to find a listing of all the waiver wire pickups and go through and study everything and then come out with these are the teams that do really well. And I have examples, right? For Tampa Bay, how about Nick Paul? Nick Paul, 50 games, 16 goals, 10 assists, 26 points. I don't think Nick Paul ends up with 35 goals. I don't think he ends up necessarily with 30, but he should end up with about 25. I think 25 is absolutely a doable number. And I found it interesting that they were talking in a game I was watching the other night of Tampa about Nick Paul and Hagel. Now they've lost players. And then they said, well, it just shows the Stars are going to have to produce more. And I kind of scratched my head because the way it was phrased made it sound like it's a downgrade having Nick Paul and having Brandon Hagel rather than the other support guys that they've had to lose like Palat. I don't know that it is. I think Hagel's played really well, and I think Paul has as well. I think they've been absolutely fantastic. So I wanted to mention Paul because Tampa Bay's having a very good year, in part because of the Nick Paul and Brandon Hagel trades. They have absolutely benefited Tampa for their continued excellence. I look forward to seeing what they do at the deadline this year to do it again. Which younger players or which in their prime underpaid players they're going to bring in to help to keep this going into next season as well. For the New York Rangers, and I have been so impressed with Coco for a long time, so I wanted to put Coco on the board here. 53 games, 11 goals, 17 assists, 28 points. I know he's the number 2 draft pick. Remember what I said about Trent Frederick? Once a guy's in the NHL, I prefer to just say, you know what, I don't care what his draft position is. Who is this player right now? That kid line with the Rangers, it's legit. Heedle's had all the goals, yes. Lafreniere's not producing as much as people would like, but it doesn't mean he's playing badly. And this is a conversation that I have, that I enjoy having is, just because a guy's not producing points doesn't mean he's playing badly. It does not mean the guy's necessarily a bust. And in Coco's case, now the production's starting to pick up. He's starting to get confident. You can see it when he's out there. He is playing with more confidence. And I really think the Rangers have done the right thing in keeping Coco, not making that move when people were suggesting it last year or the year before. And I think with Lafreniere, it's going to be the same thing. I think he's going to develop. People just don't like the speed at which these guys are developing. But that's definitely a video I can do at another time too. Because I seem to remember the Detroit Red Wings and the New Jersey Devils, I'll say 20, 25 years ago, having the same issue, where they'd have young guys come in the lineup and it seemed to take forever for these guys to develop. But when they did, right? All right, Columbus. Columbus, kind of tough to find a story that people aren't talking about. But I'll talk about Kent Johnson, because I don't hear a lot about Kent Johnson. And if you're saying, what about Marchenko? Everybody's talking about Marchenko. But for Kent Johnson in 50 games, 11 goals, 15 assists, 26 points, I think he's been really good. I think he's been really good on a team that's not very good. And so Johnson's numbers this year, I don't care how much he scores. I just care about his game and that development and that improvement. And I've seen that from him. And I think the numbers will come as soon as next year. I think the numbers will rise. Really, the team's got to get better for his numbers to go up. He is still a rookie. So I'm not expecting Johnson's numbers to be fantastic. I don't think he's going to win Rookie of the Year. I think that's Matty Beniers' award to lose at this point. But Johnson's potentially in the hunt if he and Columbus could somehow get things going. For Vancouver, you're darn tootin'. It's hard to find a good story out of Vancouver because we talk about Vancouver a lot. But I'm going to say this. So for Patrick Allvin, a lot of criticism, and there's a lot of warranted criticism when it comes to Vancouver management. But Ethan Bear's been really good. 40 games, 3 goals, 8 assists, 11 points. I think his play gets better as the season goes along. He's a restricted free agent, I do believe, this summer. I think they should find a way to keep him. I do. I think that if a team invests in Ethan Bear right now, I think they will be grateful for it. I mean, I'm not talking a long-term deal, but as he's coming into his own, into his prime, I think with Ethan Bear, I think he's going to be a good one. And I think Vancouver's a really good spot for him. I think it's been mutually beneficial. After just being caught in a situation in Carolina, they just have so many blue liners. So Bear being an extra there isn't necessarily damning of him. It just says how good the depth is there. The odd part being Chatfield being in their top 6 when Vancouver couldn't find a spot for him. But I think that's more indicative that Chatfield's game suits Carolina more than it suited Vancouver. See, you can do this without insulting one team or the other. I don't understand that. Vegas... Now I've talked about Will Carrier a lot lately. Will Carrier's really impressed me, and he did. There have been times where he hasn't, where I've thought he was kind of overrated. But this year, 48 games, 14 goals, 8 assists, 22 points. He's been remarkable. Will Carrier is a lot of fun to watch. One of the hardest working Vegas players. When Vegas's third line's getting a lot of ice time, it's because Carrier, Colasar, Waugh, that line works. They work their butts off every single shift. So if Bruce Cassidy needs that team to have a bit of a spark, that's the line you throw out there, and Carrier draws a lot of attention. And he's got an outside shot of 20 goals. He could hit 20 goals this year, and I think that'd be great. Anytime a guy who works that hard gets 20 goals, I think that's awesome. For Seattle, so we've talked a lot about defensemen that might be in the running for the Norris. We've talked a lot about the Rod Langway Award and how that should go to defensive defenseman. Adam Larson. In 53 games, he has 9 goals, 15 assists, 24 points. Adam Larson right now is having the best season he's ever had in his career. He has been absolutely fantastic. And I really think that in Larson's case, he's still flying under the radar because he plays in Seattle. Seattle with the 4 lines they roll, with the 6 defensemen. I think he's overshadowed a bit by Vince Dunn. Dunn's usually one I talk about. I wanted to talk about Larson, though, because Larson's playing quite well. And I think his contract's a bargain for Seattle. So one of the big reasons why Seattle's in the position they're in right now, and they're already 5 points ahead of the entire total they had last season, is that blue line. It's definitely been better than last year, and Larson's been a big part of that. So we get to Montreal. We're almost done. All you fine people on the internet. I'm going with, and Montreal was a bit tough too until I really thought about it. And so I'm going with Mike Hoffman. 39 games, 9 goals, 12 assists, 21 points. Hoffman, the expectation is high, or has been. I think the expectation's dropped now over the last couple of years. But that 9 goals in 39 games, if they decided to move him at the deadline, there would definitely be teams that'd be willing to take him. Hoffman, of course, going back to his time in Ottawa, he's not that player now, and I don't think he'll be that player going forward. I don't think he'll be, a really dynamic offensive player wherever he ends up. But 9 goals in 39 games is not too shabby, especially with a Montreal team that does have its struggles with scoring. So I think Hoffman's had quietly a pretty darn good year. And so we finish things off with Florida. For Florida, if you watch Florida games, there's a name you hear more than a lot of others. And that's Eetu Luostarinen. Luostarinen, in 54 games, 11 goals, 14 assists, 25 points. Really hard. And again, hard workers are just, it's so impressive with some of these guys how they can go out every single shift, and they're just so good and so smart. And this year, Luostarinen is that guy for Florida. I think he's been absolutely excellent. So if Florida ends up getting into a playoff spot, I think Luostarinen's going to play a positive role in that. So there'll be a lot of attention to Tkachuk and obviously Barkov and your big stars. But I think Luostarinen and what he's provided to that team has been maybe a bit under the radar and underrated. So there you go, 32 players. Let me know your thoughts, players that you think are maybe quietly having a very good season, players you'd like to talk about. Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.